recently, a friend and I decided to take personality tests for each other to see if we got the same results as when we took the personality tests for ourselves. And he took mine, I got ISFP, which is what I already thought I was, so at least there were no surprises there. But as he was doing the test, some of the questions are focused on how you see the world, whether or not you like to think about abstract philosophies, existential questions and stuff like that, and I absolutely don't. But what was interesting was that he didn't know. He was like, I've never heard you talk about these things, so I don't know if you like or dislike these sorts of ideas. And so I ended up explaining that he's never heard me talk about them because they're not real to me. So, and I like things that are very concrete and that have like real actual life implications, which I just don't feel that talks about God and what ifs and thought experiments. Generally speaking, they don't have any real practical impact on my life. So why would I talk about them any more than I would talk about ghosts or fairies or any other thing that I don't believe exists? What would be the point? And so I guess then that leads to a question that nobody's actually asked me, but I'm still saying, allow me to explain, which is like, why don't you believe in God? There's so many people believe in God. In trying to explain this, I would say I'm going to use examples from Christianity because that's how I was brought up. And so that's what I know most about. But I am talking about God in general. I'm talking about belief in an afterlife, some kind of deity, some kind of higher purpose in general. But the examples I give will be from, Church of England, mostly Christianity. This isn't because of some terrible trauma. That's not to say I haven't had trauma in my life, but I didn't believe in God before that point. So there was no crisis that shattered my belief in God. And in fact, I never found the arguments of, well, if God exists, why do bad things happen, to be convincing argument anyway, because, based at least in Christianity, God gave us free will. So, I mean, we make bad things happen for ourselves. So it wasn't that pushed me into the direction of atheism. In fact, it was a relatively slow process until it was sudden. So by that I mean, when I was young, there were nagging questions like, okay, but who created God? Or if God loves us, why would be his punishment to send us to his worst enemy? And why would his worst enemy take us? There was all sorts of just logical questions that didn't make sense when I was a kid, but I still believed in God. The problem started when I was about 12. A lot of problems started when I was about 12, but this particular issue for me started when I was 12. We'd moved to Scotland, and I was in church and hearing something that's, basically implied that you needed one man and one woman to bring up a child. And I was thinking, well, what if you're a single parent? Or what if you're a gay couple? My understanding of God up until that point, even with the things that didn't logically make sense, was that he was a loving God that loved all his children unconditionally. And I was now starting to think, where's the love? He actually seems pretty vengeful and jealous and demanding and not very tolerant of the very people he's created. So, but keep in mind, I still believed in God. I just didn't want to believe in a Christian God anymore. And I did try filling that gap with ideas of Buddhism and then also crystal healing. It's I got rid of it, and then I felt like I needed something positive to believe in. So it's not, I still kind of believed in a God, but just, not the God I'd been taught. And then when I was 16, I did a night class in psychology, which is where I learned about Phineas Gage, who was a 19th century railroad worker who got a rod blasted through his head. It went through his eye, I believe, and his forehead. And what was different was everything, basically. His personality, his emotions, his attachments to people, how he responded to people. And that's when I had my crisis of like, oh shit, I don't think I believe in God. And the reason is that I wondered, okay, wait, does that mean a part of him went to heaven or whatever afterlife is, and a part of him stayed in his body? And if not, if you are not represented, if your soul doesn't represent you as a person in terms of your personality and your emotions and your attachments, in what way does your soul even represent you? And why would that go to heaven? What would be the benefit of that? And yeah, then I went home. I genuinely had a panic attack over this sudden belief that actually I don't think God exists. Not he might not, or I can't disprove it. Just shit. That it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. We like to think that in the future, maybe one day we'll be able to like upload our personalities or who we are into a computer and live forever. But that's not really how we develop or how our sense of self is. We cannot have a sense of self without our bodies. Or if you did download your personality into a computer, it wouldn't be you. And I say this because if you think about what a child needs to develop healthily, they need to be touched and loved and hugged. There is like oxytocin needs to be released in order to feel those sorts of things. They need sleep. They need to process information. They need to be spoken to. And if you deny a child those things, they will not develop in a healthy way. And that affects your personality, your emotions, your attachments, all the things that make you human and who you are. This idea that the brain and the body are, or the mind and the body are separate, it's an illusory distinction that we make in order to understand this, our sense of self is separate from other people. But we are all affected by our physical minds. However much your physical body changes, you change with it, and you cannot have one without the other and still be a human being or any other animal. And we're not as special as we'd like to think. We have more similarities with animals, even like fish, than we do differences. And let's forget about fish for a moment. Let's just think about even our closest relatives, like apes or the pets that we love, like the cats and the dogs in our lives. They have personalities and emotions and attachments, just like we do. Well, not just like we do, but they have them. And these are all things that are changeable. If any of us had a rod blasted through their head, we would be changed by that. Same with a cat or a dog or a gorilla or a human. Why would our minds, our souls, assuming we could attach our soul to our personality, stick around? Like even as ghosts, say there is no heaven or hell or whatever. Why would our trauma mean more than any other animal's trauma, given our similarities? I should also be clear that I'm not trying to change anyone's mind here. I don't think anybody who does or doesn't believe in God strongly is going to be convinced by arguments made by the other side. And that's actually, the primary reason I don't believe in God is because the evidence just isn't compelling. It isn't. And I used to use some of the arguments for God when I believed in God. There's the authoritative argument, God exists because this book or this person or this culture told me so. There's the personal experience argument, which is I feel God. There's the technicality argument, which is God is such a higher being that we couldn't possibly or shouldn't try and comprehend him or try and measure it scientifically. You've got the God of gaps, which is, well, how do you explain this if it wasn't God? And I'm just not convinced by that one either, because, just because you can't explain something doesn't mean that God did it. And it just means we haven't understood it. Then there's also God as an abstraction, which is, God is love. which is essentially meaningless. If I were to apply any of these arguments to fairies, like I believe in fairies because I got given this book on fairies, would any of those arguments be convincing to you, no matter how strongly I believed in them? In fact, if I believed in them strongly enough, would you be a little bit worried? God and religion and ideas of life and death, they are distributed around the world. They're distributed exactly like cultural and political ideas. They're not fixed. They evolve. They have evolved over time and place, and they spread. And just as you could say, how can you not believe in a God? I can say, why do you believe in God? And specifically, why do you believe in the very specific God that you believe in? And the answer is actually usually pretty simple, which is, that's the God I was taught to believe in. And you're taught to believe in any kind of God or religion or, life after death based on where you were born and when you were born and to what family. And that's purely luck. Consider also that the basis of anyone's faith, including my own at the time, was no more valid, no stronger or weaker than anybody else's basis for their faith, in the sense that it's all based on something that you're told and taught and read to. So how could I be so sure of my own, that what I'd been taught was correct? Even when I believed in God, when I was a kid, like younger than 12, I remember thinking it was awfully unfair that you would get sent to hell because you happened to be born in the wrong place and time. And, that I was lucky that I'd been taught the correct religion. Not only is it cultural, it's also changeable. And that's evidenced in the vast numbers of gods and religions and versions of gods and religions that we've had. And the problem with that is that faith claims to be an absolute truth, which would imply it's fixed and decided. But what we actually end up doing is trying to merge our beliefs with culture as it changes. And so we make up explanations and exceptions and conditions and decide, okay, this part's now metaphorical, or this part, we've misinterpreted it, or we cherry pick the good parts or cherry pick the bad parts. And then and in so doing, we are redefining God over and over again. God who is not supposed to be definable or understood by human beings. So, and I've got many examples from my own childhood that I can give. Stoning a woman to death for adultery. My dad would say, oh, that's the Old Testament, we live by the New Testament. The New Testament, who has the same God in it, the same vengeful, angry, jealous, homicidal God in it. The argument, because my dad also believed in evolution, which was against what the Bible taught, so he would say, 7 days to God might be billions of years to humans. And then also the argument, oh, I'm not religious, I have a relationship with God. But to me, it's all the same thing. It's still a belief in something supernatural, in a spiritual experience. It's faith, whether it's the Old or the New Testament, whether you believe the earth was built by God in 7 days or over billions of years. No matter what you decide is a metaphor or not a metaphor. Whether it's a relationship with God or obedience to the church, it's still faith. The fact that these arguments exist at all just highlights to me that God is a cultural thing and it is changeable. And being cultural, it is by definition man-made. And that's what makes more sense to me. That we made God in our image, not God making us in his. And that being the case, also the morals that we say are God's morals are really our morals that we have to try and reshape every now and again because, oh shit, we don't believe in slavery anymore, and oh shit, we think women are are equal to men now, and just like panicking because this book that was written so long ago, why should they apply now? If I use the example of morality, because that's something that's used quite often actually to say, well, where do you get your morals from if you don't believe in God? Well, let's say thou shalt not kill. I would argue that we might have come up with that ourselves. I don't think I needed God, the idea of God, to teach me that killing people is wrong and you should avoid it. Things like tolerance, empathy, kindness, being charitable, being less punitive, like having mercy, being forgiving, these are not especially religious traits. They might want to claim them as religious traits, but I don't. There are plenty of religious people don't have much empathy, they're pretty punitive, they're not forgiving, they're not honest. There is a benefit to the fact that my morals come from within, from years of experience and reasoning, empathetic reasoning, based on my membership as a human being with a respect for human life. And so, in a way, I feel that my morals are more consistent, or they evolve over time based on new information, rather than it being imposed on me based on fear and obedience. It's more I'm acting out of respect for humans and empathy and genuine empathy. So, is it really better to have an absolute God and absolute system of morality? I'd say no. Arguably, the most homicidal groups have been at least the extreme religious groups, or cultish type groups. Why are you sending me an email? Don't you know that I'm doing a fucking video? And I don't really believe religious people. That's the only thing between religious people killing and not killing. That's just, is that really how we see ourselves? Nobody needs to threaten me with hell, or being seen by some other being in order for me to not kill other people. Yeah, I'm not a bad person, I'm just an atheist. As far as we know, we have a higher level of consciousness than other animals, which means we're aware of our own mortality to a different degree, and it makes sense that we might want to explain that. There are other reasons why we might want to believe in gods. Gaps in knowledge. Like I said, there's the God of gaps. Whenever we didn't know something before, it was God. It helps us understand the things that we haven't yet understood. And as humanity's gone on, we do understand more things. And so there's less and less need for God. There is a quote that I'm going to have to look up because I don't want to get it wrong. So give me a second. It's by Douglas Adams, and it says, "This is rather as if you imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, this is an interesting world I find myself in, an interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well, may have been made to have me in it." And I think that's basically how humans see the world. And perhaps in order to have a cohesive system that everybody follows so that we can have group cohesion and cooperation, that you would have this higher being. And I could go into like a whole psychology lesson about cognitive biases and how humans understand the world and why that leads to certain misperceptions of the world, but I don't think that's why anybody clicked on this video. If I'm honest, Richard Dawkins does say this a lot more concisely and better than I do, but he says that we're all atheists. It's for every other god. It's just that atheists go one god further. We just don't believe in that one final god. In fact, I wouldn't really expect to ever have to explain why I don't believe in God, just like I don't believe in ghosts or fairies or anything else, except that so many people do believe in God, and that's why I'm finding myself even considering explaining it to anybody. It's not a state worth defining in my mind, because it's just the absence of something. It's not the existence of a belief. It's the absence. So I'm an atheist because, for the same reason anybody else doesn't believe in anything else they've not seen or have evidence for. And that's the answer. I'm motivated by new experiences, which I can only experience in this body that I have now, in whatever form it takes. I am motivated by my connections and empathy for other people on the basis that it is impermanent. There is a beginning and an end. And in a way that's sad, because it means I can never communicate with my sister ever again. She is gone. But she, in being gone, she's also what she was before she was born, which was free of pain, and all the things that led up to her death. And I would love to be able to say, I'm really sorry for being such a fucking bitch when we were teenagers. I'm really sorry that I wasn't there for you. I wasn't mature enough soon enough. And that I was so horrible. I wish I could say all of those things and get forgiveness from her, but she just, the way I see the world means that's not possible. So it's not like this is the easy way to think about things. It just is the logical, in my mind, it's the logical way.